Hello, here's a question for you. Should one country be able to tell another country what to do? How about I try to be more specific? Should one country be able to tell another country that they cannot, for example, support the hungry and the farmers by buying grain at subsidized prices and selling it to the hungry? My first reaction is no way. You can't tell another country to stop feeding its hungry. But when it comes to trade and food security, things are more complex than they appear at first glance. Now I will let you know that my question was based on actual events. In 2013, India's food security bill was challenged by the USA on the basis that it violated the trade rules of the WTO. In response, India, along with other developing countries, demanded clarity on the agreement of agriculture and debated to secure the rights of developing countries to pursue domestic policies for food security without contravening international trade rules. The issue has yet to be fully resolved. Now we will learn more about the complicated relationship between trade and food security. Food security became an increasingly prominent issue in trade discussions, notably after the 2007-2008 world food price hikes. In response to rising food prices, many countries use trade measures as a way to protect against rising prices. Yet even before the food price crisis, as part of the Doha Development Round, developing countries fought to be able to protect their interests and populations. They expressed concern about being forced to compete against the developed and exporting economies on the global market. Now, just like people, states acquire food by various means. The main sources are domestic production, food transferred either as food aid or indirectly through financial aid, or food purchased from abroad and imported. In this module, we are interested in the third option, the ways in which countries access food through international trade. And of course, we want to know how this relates to food access. There are intense disagreements when it comes to the value of trade for food security. And as we have seen, the WTO promotes the liberalization of markets by negotiating rules, meaning that barriers to the free exchange of goods between countries are eliminated or reduced as much as possible. People who support trade liberalization argue that it can increase the availability and accessibility of food worldwide. But opponents believe that liberalization actually threatens food security, because developing countries, which is where the vast majority of food insecure people live, do not access markets on equal footing with developed countries. Buying food from the world market requires economic resources that poor countries often do not have, or not enough to compete with richer countries. Furthermore, critics argue that trade rules can restrict domestic policy options, thereby limiting the ability of governments to implement specific food security policies. There are special protections for the developing countries that were negotiated in the Doha round on agriculture. First, there is the Special Safeguard Mechanism, SSM, a tool that allows developing countries to raise tariffs temporarily to deal with import surges or price falls. And second, there are special products, SP, that refer to products for which developing countries are given extra flexibility in market access for food, livelihood security, and rural development. According to the logic of trade liberalization, gains in agricultural productivity, higher yields, will result in greater availability of food. Well, that makes sense. Except that we know availability does not guarantee access. Therefore, a different position on how secure food access developed, relying not only on production and liberalized trade, but on social considerations as well. Now I will explain this perspective in more detail. Some of you may be familiar with Amartya Sen's groundbreaking work on the 1943 Bengal famine. He showed that while 3 million people starved, there was adequate food supply in Bengal. The problem, he concluded, was access. Many people, including the rural landless laborers and urban service providers, did not have the means to buy food when food prices rose quickly. Furthermore, Despite the stated commitment of the WTO members to the principle of liberalization, agriculture in developed countries remains heavily subsidized. This serves to artificially depreciate food prices on global markets. Now let's be clear, low prices are good for the urban poor, but they are not that good for producers. And there's also evidence that countries that are dependent on food imports are more exposed to food price volatility. We can look at the food crisis of the 1970s and 2007-2008 to see clear examples of this. And another concern raised by scholars is that the developed countries that advocate the most for liberalization made extensive use of protectionist policies to advance their own economic development in the past. World Bank data suggests that the 20 wealthiest countries use the highest number of trade restrictions. We can see that less developed countries are more likely to use export bans and restrictions and import bans, while these richer countries lead with import tariffs, trade remedies, and import restrictions. Finally, scholars who research and write about trade and food security have noted that the understanding of food security has changed since the 1970s, but that trade policies have not adapted accordingly. In this lecture, I have introduced two opposing positions, and it is important to note that there are many positions in between and even beyond. And of course, we can almost certainly all agree that food is both a social good and an economic good. But that said, there are two main positions when it comes to trade and food security. Food primarily seen as an economic good, something that can be used to promote development, and food seen as a social good, a human right that should be prioritized ahead of economic development.